We all know that Mazda is moving up into the market and slowly transitioning to becoming a premium brand. Their biggest move yet is the introduction of the 2024 CX-90. So is this new SUV a closer competitor to something like the BMW X5, or is it still closer to something like the updated Honda Pilot? Or is it right in between the two cars now? Let's go for a drive and find out. Now, before we get started, I'd just like to say a word from my sponsor. I'm kidding, I don't have any sponsors. But what I do want to say is that this review is going to focus mostly on the Mazda CX-90 because it is an all-new car. The Honda Pilot, even though it does enter a new generation, it feels very similar to the previous generation. And the X5 doesn't really see any updates for the 2023 model year. It does receive updates for the 2024 model year, but I can get my hands on it for this review. Hopefully in the future I will. But anyway, this Mazda CX-90. The biggest change is that, well, all of it. It has a completely new engine, a new transmission, and even the chassis is completely new. It's now a rear drive biased all-wheel drive system. So let's start with the engine. You have two options. You can get it as a plug-in hybrid with a 4-cylinder engine, and I will be doing a review of that later on. But this one has the new 3.3-liter turbocharged inline-6. But depending on which trim level of the CX-90 you get, this 3.3 inline-6 has two power outputs. And then if you get it with the top spec trims, the GTP and the Signature here in Canada, then it comes with two more different power outputs, depending on the type of fuel that you use. I should make a chart to make it easier for you to see all the different power outputs. Right, let's see if I can break this down in a simple way. Here in Canada, the 3.3-liter turbo inline-6 in the GS, GSL, and GT trims produces 280 horsepower and 332 pound-feet of torque. This is regardless of what type of fuel you use. Mazda does recommend regular in these trims. In the GTP and Signature trims, it produces 340 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque if you use premium fuel. If you decide to use regular fuel, then it'll produce the same torque, but the horsepower drops to 319. Hopefully, this all makes sense to you now. I'm driving the Signature trim of the CX-90, so I'm getting the high output version of the inline-6 engine, and there is more than enough power and torque to get this really heavy SUV going. It can accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in about 6.5 seconds. It's not blindingly fast, but more than enough for an SUV like this. However, the inline-6 engine doesn't do things just on its own. It has a little bit of help from a 48-volt mild hybrid system. The electric motor only produces about 17 horsepower, but it produces a little over 110 pound-feet of torque. And it's all at really low RPMs. So that's why you hardly ever see the RPM, or the tachometer needle, I should say, climb past 2,000 RPMs in just everyday city driving. It has more than enough grunt low down thanks to the mild hybrid system. Now, this doesn't mean that you can drive on electricity alone, like in a Toyota Prius, for example. It instead just provides bursts of power when the engine really needs it. And it also helps with fuel economy. One of the unique ways that this mild hybrid system helps the engine is that whenever you lift your foot off the throttle pedal and just coast, so long as all the parameters are met, like the climate control use, for example, then the engine will shut off, briefly that is. As soon as you touch the throttle pedal again or brake hard enough, the engine fires up right away. But this allows you to coast for a slightly longer distance without using any fuel whatsoever and without having engine braking to slow you down. Also, the mild hybrid system aids in providing a faster auto start-stop system. However, from what I've noticed is that when the car is stationary at a stoplight, for example, and the engine needs to turn back on, it's pretty rough. Like, you can feel the entire car shaking. But when you're moving and the engine turns back on after you're coasting, then you don't feel the vibrations of the engine turning back on. It's only when the car is stationary. The 6-speed auto is gone, and in its place is a new 8-speed automatic transmission. The primary focus of this transmission is to provide smooth shifts, and I'm happy to say that it does. However, this is not the fastest transmission out there. I dare to say that the 6-speed is slightly faster, as there is a noticeable delay when using the steering wheel mounted paddle shifters. But otherwise, if you leave the transmission to its own decisions, it shouldn't be an issue for 99% of drivers. Dynamics-wise, the 2024 Mazda CX-90 has taken a turn more towards the comfort and luxury side of things rather than outright sporty driving. The rear drive biased all-wheel drive system gives the big and heavy SUV a planted feeling around corners. Mid-corner bumps hardly do anything to unsettle the car, but you do feel that 2.2-ton weight of the SUV around twisty turns. Compared to the BMW X5, it doesn't have the same agility. In a way, the sure-footed feeling will be to more drivers' preference than one that is twitchy and like as though it's on a knife's edge. The steering is hefty, which further provides that planted feeling. By comparison, the BMW X540i steering is a tiny bit lighter, but feels just as sharp. Though the X5 has an almost identical curb weight to the CX-90, it feels more agile through corners. It's more eager to change direction than the Mazda. Under the hood of the X5, you'll find a 3-liter turbocharged inline-6 engine that produces broadly similar powers to the CX-90. The transmission is an 8-speed automatic, but the engine and transmission combination make the X5 one fast SUV. 0 to 100 kilometers an hour takes around 5 seconds versus the CX-90's 6.5 second time. Plus, if that's not quick enough for you, the 2024 X540i has more power, and there's also the M60i and X5M variants to choose from as well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Honda Pilot does enter a new generation for the 2023 model year, but a lot of it feels the same as the previous generation. I guess if you have a recipe that works, then why change it, right? The V6 engine is the same at 3.5 liters and it's naturally aspirated, but it has been tweaked a little bit to produce 285 horsepower and 262 pound-feet of torque. It doesn't have any sort of mild hybrid system, so it's pure old-school power. When you're accelerating from a stop, you will notice the RPMs climb a little over 2,000, which is totally normal for a naturally aspirated V6. This engine really gets into its stride once the RPM needle goes into the mid-range, so about 3,500, 4,000 RPMs. All in all, if you just want an old-school and simple engine, this Honda Pilot still offers it. One change to this new generation compared to the last one is the addition of one extra gear. So the transmission is now a 10-speed instead of a 9-speed. Generally speaking, the transmission shifts are smooth and it knows exactly which gear to go into when you put your foot down. However, this transmission does have one little hiccup that doesn't happen too often, but I should still tell you about it. And it happens when you, for example, slow down to arrive at a stoplight, but then the stoplight turns green and you accelerate again. You will feel a little bit more of a harsher shift as the transmission changes into the appropriate gear. But other than that, like I said, very smooth shifts and it knows what to do. Where this transmission really helps is in providing fuel economy on highways. This Honda Pilot with the off-road tires is rated for 10.3 liters per 100 kilometers on a highway and 13 liters per 100 kilometers in a city. If you go for the Honda Pilot that is not the Trailsport, so one of the other trim levels that doesn't have the off-road tires, then the fuel economy numbers are a little bit better. But what I can tell you is that with this Trailsport, I'm averaging currently 11.9 liters per 100 kilometers, so you can easily achieve the rated fuel economy numbers. Plus, it doesn't require premium fuel. It only requires regular. Of course, of the three SUVs I have here, the Honda Pilot doesn't drive quite as well as the others, but it is the easiest to drive of the three. Light steering, soft suspension, and a relaxed demeanor make the Pilot a perfect family hauler. The Trailsport also allows you to go a bit deeper into the woods than other Pilot trims that are more on-road focused. It receives a 1-inch lift, trim-specific stabilizer bars, off-road all-terrain tires, torque vectoring rear differential that is also available on other trim levels, and skid plates to protect the important stuff. The Mazda CX-90 is a very quiet SUV, and you really notice this much more when you step out of the Honda Pilot Trailsport. The Trailsport with its off-road focused tires is really loud, especially on highways. But this Mazda CX-90 is quiet and serene and exactly what you would expect from a luxury vehicle. There's just one thing that bothers me about the noise in the Mazda CX-90, and that has to do with engine noise. It's not too loud when you're just cruising around town, and you do hear it when you rev up the inline six. However, it's not exactly the best sounding engine out there. Compared to the turbo 4-cylinder of the CX-9, this engine just doesn't have that deep, muscular tone. It kind of sounds bleh, which is not what I was expecting from an inline six. In the Honda Pilot, the ride is really smooth, and I would even go as far as to say that on certain roads it can be a little bit floaty feeling. But the suspension and those really thick sidewall tires absorb bumps very, very well. Wind noise is pretty much non-existent, even though this is a box on wheels. Engine noise is more prevalent at higher RPMs, and this V6 actually sounds really good when you put your foot down. A lot better than that inline six in the Mazda CX-90. But the most annoying sound that intrudes into the cabin is road noise from these tires. It's particularly bad at highway speeds. So if you don't plan on taking the Honda Pilot off-roading all that often, then you're better off sticking with one of the other trim levels so that you don't get these all-terrain tires. Now let's take a look at the interiors of these three SUVs. Both the Mazda and Honda are available with up to 8-person seating, but that depends on the trim level you go for. For example, this CX-90 Signature is only a 6-passenger SUV, but the GT and GTP are 7-passenger, while the GS and GSL are 8-passenger. But in the Honda, you can have 8-passenger seating on all trim levels except for this Trailsport. The X5 is normally a 5-passenger SUV, but you can option it with a third row for up to 7. However, the third row option is no longer available for the 2024 model year. All three SUVs have a lot of space in the front seats for tall adults like myself at 6'4". All three also provide a tall driving position for those that are shorter, and all three have comfy seats, though I do like the big sofas in the Honda Pilot the most. As for the interior designs, the Pilot provides a feeling of familiarity. All of the controls are simple to use and where you'd expect them to be. It's the same story in the BMW. This 2023 X5 still has the older and better design in my opinion, because it retains the physical buttons for most of the used functions like the climate temperature, fan speed, heated and ventilated seat controls, and so on. In the Mazda, the interior design is a huge step forward. Of course, the lower trim levels will probably not have the same level of luxury and premium materials, but this signature trim really elevates the style. The Nappa leather seats are soft to the touch, and the quilting pattern is a nice addition to the center portion. I particularly like the piece of fabric on the center of the dashboard. One thing that I find a little bit annoying about the interior of the Mazda CX-90 has to do with the climate. Now, I am very happy that Mazda decided to keep the physical controls for the climate. However, changing the temperature is a little bit counterintuitive. So let's say, for example, you want to lower it, so you see the little blue arrow and you click down on it and temperature goes down. But what if you're too cold? You want to raise up the temperature. Right next to it is the red arrow pointing upwards, so you think, I'll just pull up on the button. But wait, you can't. It's actually the same operation as the temperature down. You can't click it upwards, only downwards. Not a big deal, but again, a little bit counterintuitive. In the second rows, there's barely a finger's width of leg space between the Mazda and the Honda. They're both very similar, with sliding and reclining captain's chairs. Headroom is also nearly identical between the two. All three SUVs are available with sunshades, but in the Mazda, the windows don't lower all the way for the rear passengers. The X5 has a tiny bit less legroom, but just about the same amount of headroom as the other two. The seats in this two-row X5 don't have any adjustments, but with the optional third row, the second row seats do get sliding and reclining power adjustments. To get in the third row of the CX-90 and Pilot, you just have to press one button in the Honda and pull on a lever in the Mazda. The seats tilt and slide forward to provide access. The opening in the CX-90 is a tiny bit smaller than that of the Pilot, as is the amount of space that passengers have in the third row of the Mazda. The Pilot provides more of it for both headroom and legroom. Furthermore, the CX-90 has almost no space for your feet due to the rails on which the second row seats slide on. And finally, in the trunks behind the third row, the Honda Pilot has about 185 liters more space than the CX-90. Fold down the third row seats and the Pilot Trailsport's cargo capacity drastically increases to 1,685 liters. Compare that to the Mazda's 1,155 liters and the BMW X5's 960 liters of cargo space. With all rows of seats folded, the Pilot Trailsport has the most amount of cargo space with over 3,000 liters, while the CX-90 and X5 are just over 2,000 liters of cargo space, with the Mazda just edging out the BMW. One more thing to mention, I really like that power split folding liftgate on the BMW X5. When it comes to gadgets, the Mazda CX-90 doesn't have any of the gimmicks, quote unquote, that you'll find in some luxury SUVs. I'm talking about things like a fragrance system or pop-out door handles or lights in the sunroof. Instead, it just has the usual stuff like soft Nappa leather upholstery, heated and ventilated front and second row captain's chairs, high-resolution surround view cameras, a panoramic sunroof, a head-up display, power liftgate with a lock button, and even a power adjustable steering wheel, among many other features. The BMW X5 is available with almost all of the same features, minus the ventilated second row seats, but it does have a few more unique gadgets like the aforementioned lights in the sunroof, or heated and chilled cup holders, or soft closed doors. The Honda Pilot is a bit more traditional than the other two, with just heated front and second row seats, although ventilated seats are available, but just not in the second row seats. It has a panoramic sunroof like the others, a smaller 9-inch touchscreen with wireless Android Auto or Apple CarPlay connectivity, a head-up display is available, there's a wireless phone charging pad, 3-zone automatic climate control, and remote start, among a few other features. But all of these gadgets don't come cheap, and indeed, neither do the SUVs that I have here. The BMW X5 is the most expensive, as one would expect, with a starting price of $86,000 Canadian. With packages and options, that number can quickly grow into the six-figure territory. Between the Mazda and the Honda, you'd expect that the Honda to be less expensive, but that's not quite the case. The 2023 Pilot starts at $50,650 Canadian, while the 2024 CX-90 starts at $45,900 Canadian. At that price point, the Pilot does have a few more standard features like a power liftgate and power adjustable driver's seat. At the other end of the spectrum, this CX-90 Signature is a tiny bit more expensive at $63,300 Canadian versus $62,850 Canadian for the Pilot Black Edition. So where does the Mazda CX-90 stand? Is it still closer to something like the Honda Pilot, or is it closer now to something like the BMW X5? Well, in my humble opinion, I think that its place is right here in the center. It doesn't drive quite as nicely as something like the X5, and it doesn't have quite the same level of luxury as something like the Mercedes-Benz GLE, but it feels a lot more premium than something like the Honda Pilot. So its place is definitely right here in the center, along with Genesis and Acura. As for the Honda Pilot, it still is one of the best family SUVs out there. It's spacious, it's comfortable, and now it's more capable with this Trailsport trim. But as I said earlier in the video, if you don't have a adventurous type of family and you don't plan on taking the Pilot off-roading all that often, then just stick with one of the other trim levels of the Pilot, because these tires are pretty loud. And that's it. If you'd like to know more about any of these SUVs, apart from that specific trim of the X5, I do have other reviews of the X5. But if you'd like to know more of them, I have written reviews of them with a few more details over on my website. You can find those links in the video description or click on the pop-up banner right up here. And as always, I will see you in the next car or truck or, guess what, another SUV. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you next time.